the mental flaw that nearly killed Musashi and changed his life forever. Harima Province, Japan. The year is 1600. At just 16 years old, Miyamoto Musashi had already experienced something most men never would: real victories in real duels. These were not rehearsed contests. They were not symbolic matches. They were fights where hesitation meant death. He was no amateur. He had trained since childhood. His body was hardened. His technique was refined. His movements were precise, efficient, economical. When he practiced a counter, he practiced it thousands of times. When he trained endurance, he pushed past exhaustion. He was, by every visible standard, prepared. But during his fourth duel, something happened that no opponent had ever forced him to confront. He froze. The opponent advanced with lethal intent. Musashi's stance was correct. His grip was firm. The counterattack had been drilled into his muscles until it was automatic. His body knew exactly what to do. And yet, for 3 seconds, he did not move. 3 seconds. In an ordinary situation, 3 seconds is nothing. In a duel to the death, it is everything. The blade was coming. His body was ready. But something invisible seized control. Thoughts cut through his focus like unseen blades. What if he's faster? What if this is the duel where you die? What if you misjudge the distance? His muscles were primed for action. His mind stalled them. He survived. His training carried him through. His technique compensated for the hesitation. He won, but narrowly. Far too narrowly. That night, alone in the dark, he confronted a realization more unsettling than any opponent. His greatest enemy was not across from him. It was within him. He had spent 6 relentless years training his body. He had sharpened technique, built endurance, studied strategy. But he had never trained the mind that controlled it all. In combat, hesitation kills before the blade ever lands. And that hesitation did not come from weakness in skill. It came from a lack of internal command. What disturbed him most was not the 3 seconds themselves. It was recognizing that this was not an isolated event. It had been happening constantly, quietly, in everyday decisions. He would decide to wake at dawn and remain in bed. He would decide to train longer and stop early. He would decide to avoid distraction and give in. The mind negotiated, and he allowed it. He began to see a pattern. His decisions were not final. They were suggestions. His mind debated them, resisted them, sometimes overruled them entirely. In small matters, this seemed harmless. In battle, it was fatal. That night, he asked a question that very few men ever dare to ask. I have trained my body for 6 years. Why have I trained my mind for none? It was a structural flaw. Every warrior trained strength. Every warrior trained technique. Every warrior studied strategy. But almost none treated the mind as a separate instrument requiring discipline. Most men believed they were their thoughts. If the mind said rest, they rested. If it said fear, they felt fear. If it said later, they postponed. Musashi separated identity from instrument. He realized something radical for his time. You are not your mind. You are the one who issues commands. The mind is the mechanism that executes them, and mechanisms must be trained. A wild horse cannot be tamed through argument. It is trained through repetition, conditioning, and structure. If the mind was responsible for freezing in combat, then it was also responsible for daily failures, procrastination, distraction, indulgence, comfort-seeking. Those small failures were not trivial. They were training sessions in disobedience. And if resistance could be trained, obedience could be trained as well. That night, a new principle took root in him. Train the mind as systematically as the body. Not emotionally, not philosophically, mechanically. He was not seeking motivation. Motivation fluctuates. It depends on mood. He was seeking responsiveness. Responsiveness is different. It is structural. It is automatic. He wanted his mind to obey the way a trained arm obeys a command, without negotiation, without delay, without internal argument. From that moment forward, every decision would become a training session. Waking or not waking, acting or delaying, resisting or giving in. Each choice would either strengthen responsiveness or reinforce disobedience. Weeks later, he did something that would have seemed absurd to other warriors. He paused his sword training. Instead, he studied his own mind. For 30 days, he observed it like a strategist analyzing an opponent. He documented every moment of resistance, every hesitation, every internal argument. He would decide to wake at sunrise. His mind would suggest 5 more minutes. He would decide to practice a difficult kata. His mind would whisper that he had done enough. He would decide to avoid distractions. His mind would produce elegant justifications to indulge them. As he recorded these patterns, a disturbing clarity emerged. His decisions were not sovereign. They were proposals. And his mind had veto power. This was more dangerous than any external adversary. If the mind could veto small decisions, it could veto critical ones. If it could sabotage morning discipline, it could sabotage a split-second counterattack. The problem was not technical, it was hierarchical. There was no clear authority within him. There was negotiation everywhere. And negotiation under pressure creates vulnerability. So he designed an experiment. Nothing mystical, nothing dramatic. A single command. Sit completely still for 5 minutes. No adjusting posture, no scratching an itch, no shifting weight, no responding to impulses. 5 minutes. For a trained swordsman, the task felt trivial, but within 60 seconds, resistance surged. This is pointless. You should be training. Your leg is uncomfortable. Move. The body wanted relief. The mind supplied arguments. For the first time, he did not analyze the thoughts. He issued a command. Remain. The 5 minutes felt longer than some duels, not because of physical strain, but because of mental rebellion. When the time ended, he did not celebrate. He noted the result. Resistance occurred. Command maintained. The next day, he extended it to 10 minutes. The resistance intensified before he even sat down. The mind anticipated discomfort. It predicted the struggle. And that revealed something essential. The mind learns patterns. If it can learn to resist, it can learn to obey. He began progressive conditioning. Just as with physical training, he applied gradual overload. 20 minutes of focused reading without allowing the mind to drift. 50 repetitions of a specific kata with unwavering concentration. 30 minutes of seated stillness without movement. Every failure had a cost. If he broke concentration early, he repeated the entire task multiple times. Not as emotional punishment, but as structural correction. The equation was simple. Disobedience must cost more than obedience. Over time, something shifted. The mind, which once produced cascades of arguments, began reducing resistance. Not because it was inspired, because it calculated. Resisting created more effort. Obeying ended the task efficiently. Obedience became the path of least resistance. This was the beginning of what he later described as mastery of kokoro, the unification of decision and action. Not emotional suppression, not denial of fear, operational alignment. A decision was no longer a wish, it was a command. Months passed. The transformation was subtle but profound. Waking at dawn required no internal debate. Beginning practice required no psychological preparation. The command triggered movement almost immediately, not because thoughts vanished, but because thoughts no longer held authority. He understood then that the mind is neither naturally disciplined nor naturally weak. It becomes what it is trained to be. Every abandoned decision reinforces delay. Every executed decision reinforces responsiveness. Mental discipline stopped being an experiment. It became the foundation of his path. Before defeating opponents, he would eliminate negotiation within himself. Because in real combat, there is no time to debate. There is only decision, and execution. And in that silent space between thought and action, Musashi began building something more powerful than technique, a mind that obeyed. Months into his mental training, Musashi noticed something subtle but critical. His mind was obeying, but it was not obeying immediately. He would decide to begin a kata and start 5 minutes later. He would decide to rise at dawn and remain lying still for a few lingering breaths. He would decide to act and then hesitate. The action happened, but there was a delay, and in that delay, he discovered the final stronghold of resistance. Between decision and action exists an invisible space. It is small, sometimes only seconds, but it is where negotiation lives. It is where the mind generates alternatives, justifications, and softer versions of the original command. Start in 5 minutes. Prepare first. Wait for the right moment. Do it when you feel ready. These thoughts appear reasonable. That is precisely why they are dangerous. Musashi understood something profound. Hesitation does not begin with refusal. It begins with delay. In combat, 3 seconds had nearly cost him his life. In daily discipline, those same 3 seconds were costing him consistency. So he eliminated the space. He created a rule so simple it was brutal. 3 seconds. When a command was issued internally, action had to begin before he reached the count of 3. Not after, not eventually, before 3. If movement had not begun by then, the consequence was immediate repetition of the task, tenfold if necessary. The first time he hesitated before initiating a complex kata, he forced himself to perform the entire sequence 10 consecutive times without rest. The physical exhaustion was severe, but the psychological message was unmistakable. Delay costs more than obedience. The mind learns quickly when consequences are consistent. After repeating this correction once, hesitation sharply declined. The mind began calculating faster. Immediate action meant less suffering. Delay meant multiplication of effort. Within weeks, the gap began disappearing. Decision triggered movement. Command became action. There was no longer a pause long enough for internal debate to gain momentum. But just as he felt he had solved the problem, a deeper layer revealed itself. On some days, discipline flowed effortlessly. On others, despite the system, there was tension. The mind obeyed, but reluctantly. The mechanics were sound. The rule was clear. So what was causing friction? The answer was not behavioral, it was structural. Musashi recognized that within him lived 2 distinct forces. One sought mastery, excellence, precision, growth beyond limits. The other sought comfort, rest, ease, immediate relief. As long as these forces held equal authority, conflict was inevitable. Sometimes mastery would win. Other times comfort would dominate. The result was inconsistency. This was not a failure of discipline. It was a failure of hierarchy. An army without clear command fractures under pressure. A mind without clear priority fractures under stress. So he established a hierarchy that would not bend. Mastery above comfort. Honor above pleasure. Truth above convenience. He did not merely write these words. He internalized them as law. From that moment forward, when comfort suggested staying in bed, the decision was already made. Comfort ranked lower. There was no debate. When avoidance whispered against difficult training, mastery overruled it instantly. The internal civil war ended because the chain of command was clear. And something remarkable followed. Discipline no longer required emotional intensity. It no longer required motivational speeches inside his head. It became structural, predictable. Predictability for a warrior is power. Years later, when he faced dozens of opponents undefeated, the external observer might have attributed it to superior technique or physical conditioning. But Musashi himself would later state, in the Book of 5 Rings, that many of his opponents were stronger. Some were technically refined. Some were strategically brilliant. His advantage was not physical superiority, it was mental stability. Stability is not the absence of fear, it is the absence of collapse. Fear can exist. Doubt can appear. Adrenaline can surge. But if they do not interrupt execution, they are irrelevant. Most men do not lose to their opponent. They lose to the delay between intention and action. They lose to the negotiation that softens commitment. They lose to the comfort that rewires tomorrow's discipline. Musashi reframed every moment as a training session. When the alarm sounded, the question was not, "Do I feel like waking?" The question was, "Am I training obedience or training delay?" When fatigue appeared, the question was not, "Am I tired?" The question was, "Am I reinforcing comfort or reinforcing mastery?" Every small act was either building alignment or reinforcing resistance. Over 50 years, this compounded. Thousands of micro-decisions reinforced responsiveness. Thousands of corrections eliminated hesitation. Thousands of commands were executed without delay. The result was not merely combat effectiveness. It was internal freedom. Decision and execution became one movement. He no longer needed to convince himself. He no longer negotiated. He no longer dramatized action. He decided, and he moved. This is the point most people misunderstand about discipline. They think discipline is intensity. It is not. Discipline is structure. When the structure is clear, behavior follows. When hierarchy is stable, action stabilizes. When delay is eliminated, consistency emerges. Musashi did not eliminate emotion. He eliminated its authority. He did not eliminate thought. He eliminated its veto power. He trained his mind the same way he trained his body, through repetition, overload, correction, and unwavering consistency. And because of that, when the decisive moment came in battle, there was no internal debate left to fight. There was only execution. The battlefield may have changed over centuries, but the mechanism has not. Today, the duel is not fought with swords. It is fought with distraction, with comfort, with procrastination, with hesitation disguised as rational delay. The structure Musashi built in the 17th century remains operational. Every morning is a training session. Every delay is reinforcement. Every immediate action is alignment. The mind is being trained regardless of intention. If commands are optional, the mind learns to ignore them. If commands are enforced, the mind learns to obey. And eventually, your life reflects the pattern you repeated most. The difference between intention and achievement is not motivation. It is hierarchy. It is immediacy. It is repetition. Musashi transformed his mind into an instrument of precision, not through momentary intensity, not through mystical revelation, through decades of consistent reinforcement. Train the body and it grows stronger. Train the mind and it grows responsive. Fail to train it and it trains you.